I remember the smell of the soup before I remember the camp. It was thin, gray, turnip, always turnip. 1 liter of that, and 1 liter of water. That was our ration for the day. I was a dentist in the Red Army, a doctor, an officer. In Stalag 3B, I was only a number. We stood at roll call and watched men collapse in the snow. At first they died by tens, later by hundreds. We stopped saying goodbye. We stopped asking, "Where is he?" The answer was always the same: a shallow pit behind the barracks. Hunger doesn't come suddenly. It crawls, it climbs inside your bones. Your belt gets shorter, your boots get looser, and then one day you realize you are walking on 2 sticks that used to be your legs.
The German command did not waste rations on Soviet prisoners. No parcels, no mail from home, no Geneva Convention visits. 1 liter of soup, 1 liter of water. That was the plan. Use them for labor until they break, and then let them die. The Americans watched this from across the wire. At first, they tried not to. Prisoners learn quickly to shrink their world. You focus on your barracks, your bunk, your own hunger. But the Russians were impossible to ignore. Skeletons in tattered uniforms, eyes too large for their faces, men too weak to climb onto the bunks, sleeping on the floor like discarded clothes. Some of the Americans began to talk.
We knew about them before we saw them clearly. Rumors at first. They have food. Every Friday, trucks come in. Chocolate. Can you imagine? Chocolate. We laughed. Then we stopped laughing because our mouths were too dry. And then, one night, we heard it. A dull, heavy thud in the dark on our side of the wire. Not boots, not a rifle butt. Something smaller, denser, a tin can.
On the American side of Stalag 3B, a few men had made a decision. They had enough to survive. Barely. They also had something that was more powerful than calories. Cigarettes. Cigarettes were currency. With them, you could soften a guard. You could buy a longer look away. You could buy a few seconds of darkness. The plan, so simple it sounded insane, likely began with 2 American brothers in the camp, Michael and Peter Volch. Around them, others gathered. Men like Dr. Sidney Brockman, a public health worker from Texas, William Jerima, a future New York City police detective, and Angelo Spinelli, who had smuggled a tiny camera into the camp, hiding it from German searches. They decided to share their food, not with friends, not with allies they might see again. With Soviet soldiers they barely knew, men told to hate them, men they were told were the other side. They waited for Friday parcels. They gathered extra tins and bread. They bribed the right guards with the right cigarettes. And when the searchlights swung away and the boots faded into the distance, they stepped into the shadows and started to throw.
The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick. A small parcel flew over the first fence, over the no man's land, over the second wire. It landed not far from me in the mud. We all froze. No one wanted to move. Move too fast, and the Germans would notice. Move too slow, and some other starving man would reach it first. I walked toward it like a sleepwalker. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked it up. It was heavy. Inside, meat, biscuits, a little chocolate, food from another world. I did not eat right away. I could not. I just held it in my hands and stared at the American compound. On the other side of the wire, shapes moved in the dark. An arm lifted. A hand waved. No words. We had no common language. But I understood. They were saying, "Eat."
The operation grew. Every Friday, when the Red Cross parcels arrived, the Americans secretly set aside portions, cans, biscuits, sugar, chocolate that could have been saved for their own birthdays spent in captivity. At night, they tested their arms. The distance between the compounds was 8 meters. Some of the men could throw 100. The food arced over the wire in the dark and landed among the Russians. A few of the German guards looked the other way. Cigarettes helped. Humanity helped more. Others watched more closely. The risk was obvious. If the Germans decided that the Americans were feeding the Russians, the punishment would be brutal. But the throwing continued.
Hunger makes you selfish. You dream of food. You count crumbs. You hate the man who has more than you, even if it is only in your imagination. Yet here were these Americans throwing away survival into our compound. They did not know my name. I did not know theirs. But every time a parcel came flying over the wire, I felt something I had not felt in months. Shame and hope. Shame that strangers were feeding me. Hope that somewhere outside this camp the world had not gone completely mad. They saved many of us. I am certain of that. And then one day, the Germans noticed.
The Gestapo arrived. One morning, without warning, every single American prisoner in Stalag 3B, all 8,000 of them, was ordered out of the barracks. They were marched into an open field, straight into the sun. They stood there for hours. Gestapo officers walked the lines. They shouted. They threatened. Who was throwing food to the Russians? Who was betraying the rules of the camp? Inform now, they said, or all of you will suffer. It would have been easy for someone to break. Hunger, fear, the heat beating down, the memory of beatings, executions, disappearances. 8,000 men, 8,000 chances to end the secret. None of them spoke. Not one. On the Russian side, the prisoners watched, not daring to move closer.
We saw them standing there, row after row of Americans, faces burning in the sun. We knew why. We had heard the dogs earlier, the shouts, the boots running. I remember thinking, this is for us, because of us. The Gestapo officers walked up and down like wolves, pointing at men, dragging some out of the line, questioning them. But no one gave a name. That silence, that was the loudest sound I have ever heard. The Germans eventually tired. They sent the men back to their compound. And that night, when the camp went quiet, a single small parcel still flew over the wire.
The Gestapo did not find the organizers. Dr. Nikita carried a different reminder, a scar from Gestapo interrogation etched into his body like a signature of those days. The war moved on. Front lines shifted. The Red Army advanced. Camps emptied or were overrun. Stalag 3B vanished into the larger catastrophe of 1945. The Americans went home, to Texas, to New York, to quiet suburban streets and busy city jobs. They married. They raised children. Most never spoke in detail about the Russians they had tried to feed. In the Soviet Union, survivors like Dr. Nikita returned to a different kind of struggle. He went back to dentistry. He built a life in a country that did not like to talk about the times its soldiers had been captured. But inside, the vow remained.
I told myself in that camp, if I live, I will find them. It sounded impossible. How do you find men whose names you barely know in a country you have never seen, across an ocean you have never crossed? For years I said nothing. You did not talk about being a prisoner of war in my country. You worked, you obeyed, you tried to forget, but I could not forget. Every time I saw a piece of dark bread, I saw that first parcel in the mud. Every time I smelled tinned meat, I heard the soft thud of a can landing near my feet, thrown by invisible hands in the night. I grew old, my hair turned white, and still, I waited.
Then, in the 1980s, the world shifted again. New words appeared in Soviet newspapers: glasnost, perestroika, openness, restructuring. Foreign journalists were allowed more freely into Moscow. Old stories, long buried, began to surface. For one American reporter, A routine assignment in Moscow turned into something else when he met a Russian dentist who would not stop talking about American prisoners of war. The dentist's name was Dr. Nikita Zakarovich. He spoke of Stalag 3B, of the Americans from Tobruk, of the food, of the interrogations. He remembered details that no history book had ever printed. 8,000 American prisoners, several hundred Russians, 1 liter of soup, 1 liter of water, 5 kilograms of food parcels every Friday, and the throwing. Always the throwing.
When the American journalist came to my apartment, I was nervous. I had told this story in my head 1,000 times, but never to a real American. I showed him my scar. I told him about the brothers, 2 Americans who first spoke to us through the wire. I told him about the man with glasses from Texas who gave away half his chocolate, about the New York policeman who could throw a can as far as a football field. I did not know their names, not all of them, but I knew this. They saved my life, I said. Without them, I would not be here speaking to you. He listened, he wrote, and then he said the words I had waited 40 years to hear. We will try to find them.
Across the ocean, in America, the journalist's story found its way to the men of Stalag 3B. A retired health department worker in San Antonio read about a Russian dentist who remembered him feeding prisoners through the wire. A retired New York City police detective recognized the camp description immediately. He had been there. He remembered the Russians. He remembered the throwing. Their names were Dr. Sidney Brockman and William Jerima. And one day, in a quiet American house, a phone rang. On the other end of the line, thousands of miles away, in a modest Moscow apartment, another phone rang too.
The voice on the line was older, rough, American. Dr. Zakarovich, he asked. I am here, I said. He told me his name. He told me, I was in Stalag 3B. We tried to send you food. My hands were shaking again, like the day I first held that piece of bread. 43 years fell away. I remember, I said. I remember you. I remember all of you. I could not see his face. I could not touch his hand. But in that moment, the wire, the mud, the starvation, the shouting Germans, the Gestapo, all of it moved aside. There was just one man speaking to another man. Thank you, I said. From all of us who survived, thank you.
2 old men, once enemies on paper, spoke across an ocean about a camp that no longer existed. One had thrown food over a fence. One had caught it with trembling hands. Both had carried the memory for a lifetime. History often remembers wars as arrows on maps, front lines, divisions, battles. But sometimes the most important line is 8 meters wide, a strip of mud between 2 fences where hungry men risked their lives to keep strangers alive. In Stalag 3B, 8,000 Americans chose silence when threatened, and chose generosity when starving. In Moscow, one Russian dentist chose never to forget. And because he remembered, we do too.